This session, Relationships Over Everything, is all about looking at the current moment of distance learning a little bit differently. A couple of things before we get started. I would love, if you're the kind of person who likes to engage on social media, for you to follow me at Colin E. Seale on Twitter or at thinkLaw US at either handle. If you are more of an Instagram kind of person and want to follow me on Instagram, you're just going to follow me at Colin Seale. That middle initial actually makes a difference because my little brother is also named Colin Seale. My father clearly had a lot of issues in his life, so it's really important that if you don't want to tweet to some random 27-year-old in San Francisco, you want to get that initial straight. So as people are coming in, if those of you that might not have heard me in the very beginning, I would love for you to come in, say like why you're joining us today, where you're joining us from, and let us know a little bit about your role, because I think that's going to allow us to push a little bit deeper. I should also be clear that a lot of the strategies that we're talking about today are going into a lot more depth in the Thinking Like a Lawyer book. If you go to the thinkLaw website, or if you do the little scan thing on your phone, or even just go to thinklaw.us-NAGC, you could enter in your information and get a little bit more. Any questions you have, you could also email me at Colin E. Seale as well. But the book is something that you can get for bulk purchase through our website if you request a quote, or you can get from Amazon if you just want to get a copy for yourself and everything that goes with it. So really, really, really excited to begin this conversation and have you all here. So let me dive right in, because that's kind of where we're at. Like, I am here in a couple of capacities. I lead thinkLaw. We do this work all over the country, teaching critical thinking using real life legal cases in upper grades, fairy tales and nursery rhymes in lower grades. And some of you that are gonna look at the schedule for tomorrow morning, I'm going all the way into all the shadiness of people like Goldilocks and her kind, who are just so unbelievably out there and suspect. And we can get our kids thinking critically at such an early age, allowing us to close the critical thinking gap before it even starts. And then we do workshops like this. Where we're working with educators, families, parents, to really try to change the conversation around critical thinking. And this is me and my crew. So Rose is 7 years old. She is in 3rd grade. She skipped over to 1st grade. You probably can look at her and tell that she runs our household. My son, Oliver, he recently graduated, and I'm very proud of him. He graduated. When I say he graduated, I say, first of all, y'all all know Oliver, because he's 5 years old, and for a long time, his favorite word was actually. Do y'all know that kid? If y'all know Oliver, just go ahead and give me a yes, that you know that kid whose favorite word is actually. But he graduated, and now his favorite word is technically. Do y'all know this kid? Technically? He's moving up in the world. And you know what? We've got this strong thing going. We've got all this life, all this love happening. But then something happened. In this pandemic, they lost their minds. I don't know what's wrong with these people. All crazy. All crazy. The stuff that goes on in my house is crazy, but y'all know exactly what I'm talking about, because none of this is easy for any of us. And when I look back at thinking about myself in this situation, when I think around the reality of me being that 1st grader who was getting in trouble all the time, and what was so interesting about me getting in trouble all the time is I was also that 1st grader who fit the profile to a T of the kid that we straight up don't reach. We just don't reach this kid, because I was the kid who was growing up in a struggle. I was on free and reduced lunch. My family was immigrants. I was the 1st generation born into the United States, living in Brooklyn, New York in this struggle, experiencing a decade of my father being incarcerated for selling drugs. I'm the kid whose genius typically gets left on the table. And what I always found so interesting about this story is, by the time I got randomly kind of put into this gifted and talented class, to a journey that I talk about a lot more in this book, the same kind of behavior that I used to get in trouble for was now required. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, in 1st grade, me asking a whole bunch of questions was willful defiance. But in this class, it was like being inquisitive and curious. And when I think about that, when I think about what that meant, I can't help but wonder, like, are we missing something in this entire conversation when it comes to this moment that we are in of pandemic learning? Let me kind of go a little bit deeper around this, because in my Forbes column, I've been spending a lot of time just talking around these issues of like equity and access when it comes to distance learning. But if we are being real, for being honest, issues of equity and access in education, truly being connected means a lot more than a working device in a hotspot. Having access has long been an issue, well before COVID. And if we're talking about access, I think we get to this point right now where we got to just kind of lay it all out here. So I want y'all to bring the fire. What up, Brooklyn? Brooklyn's always in the house. Thank you. So what's going on real quick? What's going on? Like right now, if you look at like distance hybrid learning, family feud style, what would be the number one challenge? If we ask educators from all over the country, what's the number one issue they're facing with it? All of y'all could get an answer here. None of y'all gonna be that dumb fifth family member. You're like, yo, who that person even come from? Like, no, y'all all got this. All I need you to do is just tell me, what do you think the biggest challenge are? No one's gonna get it right. The biggest challenges, throw it in the chat and make sure you're doing it to all panelists and attendees so everybody can see your answers. Everyone can see your answers, okay? And put it in the chat. So some people say connections, okay? So we got the connections. What else we got? Keeping them engaged. The time management all over the board for the teachers, for the students, even for the parents. I mean, real talk. If you're giving my kindergarten kid a grade, you're basically giving me a grade. Well, my kid is late on turning in work, it basically means that I dropped the ball, right? Because he's in kindergarten. That's just kind of how this thing flows. Anxiety. Let's talk about that, right? There's a huge social emotional challenge that's going on. The idea of like, Chris is talking about parents doing the work for their child. I have a colleague in Georgia. I don't know if I saw any Georgia people in the house, but a colleague in Georgia, they use MAP testing to determine gifted. And she's like, it's the damnedest thing. Wouldn't you know it? That like 95% of her kindergartners at home are at a 5th grade level. I don't know what they had in the drinking water that year those kids were born, but we've got mad geniuses amongst us. And we realize that there's a balance. There's a kid in my son's kindergarten class. I mean, I love him, he's super cute, but his dad has him in his lap every day. And his dad does not let this kid answer any questions, doesn't let him unmute himself, does every single thing for him. And I'm like, whoa, man, this is tough. This is tough. There's so many challenges, okay? So we start looking at this, okay? Don't get out of line, Balaki, okay? Hold it together. We know that time is one of them. We know that time is one of the big challenges that we've got here. We've got lowered expectations. The story just came out. New York City, the biggest school district in the country, they're not giving anybody a failing grade, period. System-wide, nobody could fail, period. So when we look at this time, I know the answer to this question. I know that it's both more and less. I know that people are teaching in person, teaching hybrid at the same time at home. If they're doing strictly virtual, it's like, when are they actually off? Like, when are they really like legitimately off? And we start thinking about this idea of even looking at that part of the funk, it's even more funky because we're like, all right, so like the one thing that y'all want to prioritize and make sure we're doing is like the state tests. Like somehow that's become the priority that we got to make sure we do that. And I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying like that's the one definitive thing that we've got. And we know that like in-person learning, challenging space to teach new content, it's hard. Teaching brand new content and distance learning is really, really hard. I mean, my son is learning how to read, which means, again, I'm having to teach him how to read because there's only so much that can happen in that sort of environment. It's just so challenging getting to the routines, getting to these systems. So when I start looking at this, we look at what do we do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I think that most school systems have agreed that this is where we must start. We must start by looking at this construct of Maslow's before Bloom's. And I get it, right? Maslow's before Bloom's. Like I fundamentally understand this. But I want to talk about this from a different framework. I want to look at this one as construct around what do we mean when we say equity? What do we mean when we say equity? Because there's one hand when we look at what's going on, and we're talking about learning loss and the COVID gap and all these things that are happening right now. And I get it. I'm not ignorant to any of this. If you haven't had kids logged on for all this time and your systems are losing kids altogether, like I'm not going to put on blindfolds and act like these aren't real challenges. But I want to dig in a little bit deeper because a colleague, a superstar, legend in the field, Joy Lawson Davis, and you could catch her at this conference as well. Her and I had a conversation a few weeks back when we started talking around this idea of like finding Wakanda and this concept of like how can we do a better job of like discovering and like unleashing the brilliance in our kids who typically end up being the underrepresented and gifted populations. And what's so interesting in this is we asked a question to these people who came to the session, and about 50% when we asked them, you know, does your district prioritize like gifted education, just generally, or the needs of brilliant kids, period? And about 50-50 said like, we do or we don't, 50-50 split. When we ask them this question, in COVID-19 times, has it become less of a priority? And overwhelmingly, and granted, I'm not a researcher, these are just the people that were in the room, but this matches with what I've been talking to people with. Like, and some of you might actually like resonate with this. Like in your system right now, even regardless of how much of a priority it was, it's even less of a priority now because of all this other funk. And this is, again, why I start talking around, what do we mean when we say equity? What do we mean when we say equity? Because when I think around equity, when I think about racial justice, I look at this idea that we've got to go a little bit deeper. We've got to make a shift from talking about the mythical idea of all students to start talking about what it actually means to serve each child. If we make that shift from all to each, this means that unlocking the critical thinking that our kids have inside of them, making that an actual goal, this is where we have a completely different kind of system. This is where we create an education by default that is designed to help students lead, innovate, and break the things that must be broken. And here's where we get into this construct of like, I'm not trying to say all kids are gifted. I'm going to be real that you can't show me one child who wouldn't benefit from the kind of education that tells them that because you are in each, we're going to work with your individual talents and gifts and abilities to ensure that you, in your core tier 1 instruction, are going to have the ability to lead, innovate, and break the things that need to be broken. For gifted learners, that unlocks all sorts of magic. So when I talk about critical thinking and access, I'm trying to bring up something that we don't say enough. I get Maslow's before Bloom's, but I don't understand why we don't pay attention to the reality that for so many of our children, Bloom's is their Maslow. Bloom's is what gets them going. You're not going to get me to feel like I'm actually existing if I'm not learning. Me going to school was so important that if I couldn't go to school, I would be in tears. Me being disconnected to real learning, that affected my actual well-being. So if we're going to think around what this actually looks like, we've got to think about everything in context, because not everything works if it's not done in context. So if we are having issues in our system with classroom management, we might want to think around how more intense focus on critical thinking can unlock a different sort of classroom. So if we're having challenges in distance learning, if we're not seeing that secondary students engage, if we're seeing our lower elementary students struggle, then maybe critical thinking could be that pathway to get there. You already know that in the brick and mortar classroom, our gen ed teachers struggle to meet the needs of gifted learners or even think about the needs of gifted learners. So wouldn't it be great if we gave them the sort of low floor, high ceiling structure where they wouldn't have to feel like they're doing one more thing on an already overwhelming load? So this is why we're making the case for relationships through critical thinking, because it's not really about relationships. It's about the learning relationship. So that's what we're going to go through today. We're going to talk around what it actually looks like, this overview of critical thinking, why I'm so passionate about it, what we can do to create a construct through critical thinking, grounded in the notion of better together, and give you some practical thinking like a lawyer ideas that apply very smoothly into the distance learning framework to get us where we need to go. So with this being said, I don't have to tell you all that like this COVID-19 pandemic has revealed that we need critical thinkers more than we ever had. However, we also know that we treat it like a luxury good, and a part of the reason is we struggle to even define critical thinking. So give me a one word. Critical thinking is blank. If you had to, like, in this chat, just kind of tell me, like, what's that one word that you would use to, if you were defining critical thinking? And fine, you could do 2 words if you'd like. If you want to do a short phrase, cool. But like, I just want to give you a chance to just throw it out. Like when you hear critical thinking, like what gets you going? So it's deep. It's the ability to be creative. It's the ability to kind of look at problems logically, the ability to question. And when I start looking at what this actually comes out to be, we can think around a list a mile long of various different critical thinking skills. And often this is where we stop. Often this is where we kind of get stuck. We look at these different skills, but the reality is you need more than just skills. I'll tell a story in the Thinking Like a Lawyer book about this kid, Ramel, who was the sharpest young man I'd ever met. He was a brilliant problem solver, a super creative thinker, but Ramel was not a student in my class. Ramel was my client in my law school's juvenile justice clinic. And his problem was trying to figure out how to beat adult charges after his arrest on a serious drug bust just 1 month before his 18th birthday. Ramel had all the critical thinking skills in the world. All the critical thinking skills in the world. The challenge is you need more than just the skills. You need the habits and the mindsets to apply these skills. We call these your critical thinking dispositions. So again, to make sure everyone can kind of see what you all are saying, because y'all are saying some brilliant things, make sure you set the 2 in your chat box to all panelists and attendees. So like, think about this idea around Ramel and critical thinking requiring your skills and dispositions. And I can promise you, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. You all have a personal relationship with what I'm about to tell you. Because true or false, you know at least one person who is unquestionably brilliant, but find some way to do the dumbest stuff you ever heard of. True or false? Unquestionably brilliant and does the dumbest stuff you ever heard of. Do y'all know this person? And if y'all out here acting like you don't know this person, you might actually be this person. The difference between knowing better and doing better is often explained by having critical thinking skills, but lacking the dispositions to go with those skills. To make it even funkier, even when you've got the skills and dispositions, critical thinking is often extremely context dependent. Very context dependent. What does that look like? We got kids that will write until their hand starts hurting, but I don't do math. You got kids that will pour blood, sweat, and tears into a project in fine arts and not even attempt a science project. But if we're being real, we can't raise one-trick ponies anymore. Our kids need to be much more flexible, much more adaptable, much more agile for the kind of world that they're inheriting. And I used to stop. Right here and be like, all right, moving on. But then I realized there's so much more to critical thinking than this. And I'm going to give you all one more true or false question. True or false? As of November 2020, it is safe to say that our nation might be experiencing a crisis of anti-intellectualism. True or false? As of November 2020, we might be experiencing a crisis of anti-intellectualism. A whole lot of truths here. And I want to point out something about this. I think this is our fault. I think when I say our, I'm talking about the community. I'm talking about parents. I'm talking about educators. We've created a really funky space for anti-intellectualism to thrive. And I'll give you a quick example of this. My daughter Rose, who I showed you, she's 7, she skipped over to 1st grade. When she was 5, one time I was asking her to pass me a cup. I'm doing dishes. I'm like, hey, Rose, can you pass me the cup that's on the table? And she says, Dad, there's no cup. And I'm like, Rose, you kidding me? There's a cup right there. I got to wash it out. Please pass me the cup. And she's like, Dad, there's no cup. I see a glass, though. Man, I turn up that sink so fast. I get in her face. I'm like, listen to me. You are not going to be one of those kids who knows exactly what I'm talking about. You find that minor technicality to make me feel stupid. Because you do stuff like that, you're not going to have any friends. And I realized that might have been a little bit extra, a little bit dramatic. But at what point do we actually make it clear to our kids that doing right is more important than being right? How could it be that we've created a space where our public intellectuals are so often not just smart, but you gotta be a smart aleck. You gotta be smart with that snark. You gotta be that person that makes other people feel stupid. You gotta be the well actually kind of person. Nobody wants to hear your well actually every single day. Doing right is more important than being right. And part of the reason why, like, I'm not really a fashion designer like that, but I created a doing right is more important than being right t-shirt, which is conveniently available on the thinkLaw website. I did this because I don't get it. I don't get how we can read and honor the life and legacy of someone like John Lewis and what it meant to have good trouble, but somehow miss that doing right is more important than being right. Why do we study Gandhi? Why do we read Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail and somehow we walk away and we miss that doing right is more important than being right? How do we forget that critical thinkers engineered the Holocaust? How do we forget that there was a critical thinker who was a young man from North Texas who drove down to El Paso to massacre people for no other reason but their nationality? Like, we can't just do critical thinking for the sake of critical thinking. We've got to make sure our kids have worthy objectives of which to think critically about. And if we can ground this in the idea that doing right is more important than being right, I'm not necessarily telling them to spark a revolution. What I'm telling them to do is that there's a bigger thing to think about. I don't necessarily know what doing right is, but I'd rather approach it from that lens versus obsessing over being right. How we feel about this? Can we rock with this? Can we rock with this idea that doing right is more important than being right? Is something that you would want your own children to believe when they grew up? That you would want your students to experience out in the world? All right. So if we're looking at this, and I recognize that there's this sort of like civic-minded, social justice-oriented aspect around like doing right is more important than being right. There's also this space where we know that our kids have to be ready for a very different kind of world. It brings me to a space where I was a math teacher going to law school at night. And I really would not recommend that to anybody. It's actually not the smartest life decision to teach full-time at a Title I school, middle school and high school math, and then go to law school at night. It was really not the best moment of my life. However, something really crazy happened in law school. So first of all, does anybody know what you would learn at a school that is called law school? It's called law school. What should you learn? Seems pretty obvious to me. It's law school, so you should learn the law. But it turns out there's so many laws. It turns out that laws change all the time. So they don't teach you the law. They teach you how to think like a lawyer. And thinking like a lawyer is interesting because you know what? Does anybody in here happen to have like a friend, a family member, or maybe even a spouse who happens to be an attorney? Oh my goodness. If that's the case, if that's your spouse, like I humbly apologize on behalf of my entire profession because we are a little bit challenging to deal with. Because you go to a lawyer for a question, what kind of answer do you get? Well, on one hand, but on the other hand, have you considered answering the question? What's wrong with you? But it turns out there's a reason that 25 past presidents and our 26th president that's coming up soon, 35 founding fathers, Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, have all been attorneys. When you think like a lawyer, you're hardwired to look at problems and solutions from multiple angles. When you think like a lawyer, it's like second nature to ask questions until you get the information that you need. When you think like a lawyer, it's almost instinctual to make a variety of different claims and support those claims with valid and relevant evidence. And the more I thought about that out loud, as I'm teaching at the same time, I'm like, these are the same exact critical thinking skills, minds, and habits our kids need. Why in the world do we wait until law school to do this? Especially since this isn't just such a strong analytical framework. But if we can tap into our kids' sense of like fairness and justice, or for middle schoolers, unfairness and injustice, now we've got a powerful emotional hook to get them going. So let's try a quick example of what this looks like to make the connection between the legal aspect of it and what it means for our instruction. So Matthew had an issue like a lot of people had in March of this year. He bought tickets to go see his favorite hockey team, and he actually paid an extra fee. Funk alert, there's some funk coming. He paid an extra fee for a money-back guarantee that if the event was canceled, Matthew would get all the money he paid for his tickets back. Of course, like the NBA, like Major League Baseball and spring training, they suspended their season because of COVID-19. And they did not know exactly when it was going to be rescheduled. Matthew wants his money back. Again, funk alert. We got some funk here because, well, actually, technically, the game was not canceled. It was suspended. But we'll give you a coupon because at some point when we're able to open this back up and it'll be safe to sit around like thousands and thousands of hockey fans, Granted, I'm not sure it was ever safe to sit around thousands and thousands of hockey fans, but it certainly isn't in the middle of a pandemic. So we've got this issue. So he can get this money back coupon to purchase more stuff for an indefinite date. If you were Matthew, would you take the coupon? Yes or no? Yes or no? In the chat, where's your gut telling you? Would you take that coupon? Or would you want that money back? Like you wanted that money back, they give it a coupon for more value. Would you take it? Yes or no? And we look at this. We look at that gut feeling like, no, I want my money. I don't trust this whole operation. Y'all all bogus. I'm not going to do it. And we start thinking around this idea that I can ask that gut feeling question. Not a single child in my classroom would be unable to comprehend this idea of like, is this a good deal or not? I don't feel too great about this. It seems as it's unfairness. And that unfairness might allow me to dig into other people's positions. Now I'm going to start thinking about it. Is this StubHub? What about the NHL? And we start looking at this idea that when I start looking at whether it's StubHub or United Airlines, there's a really interesting world of stakeholder analysis where I start thinking around, well, how does this impact the people who buy the ticket, the company itself, the people at the venue, the people at the NHL? And I start getting my kids to put themselves in the shoes of others, deepen their analysis because of this funk. Because of this funk. And some of y'all are sitting here going on and on as if this was your money. You're going about this idea as if it's your own money because you know what it's like to get got. And if you don't know what getting got means, context clues, okay? So if we start looking at this idea of putting my kids in this position of being a CEO, how could you create a space where I know that technically I can just say none of y'all not getting any money back because technically and actually and in theory, like this is what it says. But might there be a different way? Might there be a different way? Like if I have this as my low floor, high ceiling construct, I wouldn't be surprised by the end of this if I get answers like, you know, how about you keep those tickets? And what I'll do is like, I'll give you the coupon plus I'll give you exclusive events that you can participate in digitally where you can have one-on-one conversations with your favorite hockey player. Kind of cool. I'm pretty sure StubHub could pull that off. I'm pretty sure that as a fan, that might actually tap into my loyalty because really, why am I mad? Is it the money? Maybe not. Because people don't go to hockey games and worry about the money. They worry about the experience. They want their money back because they miss an experience. So if I can give you a better experience, it changes things. It changes things because it can also leave a really sour taste in people's mouths so that like they're bad mouthing that company and when things get back to normal, they don't even want to work with StubHub anymore. So when I look at what's going on here, I want to tap in to the two strands of student engagement that really matter because we're not just doing engagement for engagement's sake. So often I go into classrooms and people are like, oh, look at my kids working in groups. I'm like, groups? All right. I hope somebody's learning something. I hope there's some point of being in this group. Or I hear them talking about like grit. I just wish my kids had more grit. I'm like, all right. But like, do we identify the grit that you already come in here with? Do we recognize that like, we've got kids who go through all sorts of gritty actions from the time they left your classroom yesterday to the time they walk into your classroom the next day. Kids that are trying to find a space to be able to like Zoom in with you after taking care of their other siblings, taking care of their drama, like going to a Taco Bell so they can have internet. Like, I don't want to hear about grit. What I want to hear about is what are we doing instructionally to give our kids a reason to exercise their grit? This is where motivation and agency comes in. In what way can we create more of those experiences where nobody's going to say, is this going to be on a test? Are we going to go grade for this? How can we create something that's more intrinsic? Well, part of it becomes from that learning relationship. Can you picture kids doing this? Can you picture some kids in person, some kids at home going back and forth, building off of each other's ideas and they're being creative and no two answers will be exactly the same? But part of that connectivity is that relationship building through the learning. Part of the idea here is that none of them had to be like ticket sales experts. None of them had to be actual like law school graduates to engage in this. They were competent to be successful. Meaning, I probably don't need my kids to get into a group 5 seconds after learning a super complex topic where I'm very unsure that they're competent to be successful in that particular topic. The other thing here that really matters is active citizenship. When we can connect my kids to a kind of learning where it's deeper than what I'm learning in the classroom, but it applies to something that's grander. It's giving me the tools to change the world. It's giving me the actual like practical application of that doing right is more important than being right framework, while also hitting on a lot of other really rigorous sorts of skills. And the thing that's so interesting about this is even if I don't have those skills, like the third part of the book talks around this, even if there's a lot of scaffolding that needs to happen for me to handle the level of rigor, I can go all over with Bloom's taxonomy, starting at the top, and that could give me the hook, the desire, the will, the motivation, the agency to want to dig down. And remember how I do bar graphs and look this up and like go quickly with this group thing so I can get my intervention and understand what I need to do. And I want y'all to think about this because even right now, people talking about learning loss and all this stuff, our kids can still handle more rigor than we give them credit for, even if they're behind academically. And this is the way you can help to get them there. So if we know engagement and learning is not the same thing, what I want to do is this. I want you to think about a different construct for groups. And today is grounded in the idea of better together, meaning that why are we even doing the groups in the first place? We're doing it, and this is the rubric from the Thinking Like a Lawyer book, and it's on the handout for this presentation as well. If you look at the bottom of this rubric, it's got to be true that somehow us doing this as a group is going to be better than if we were to just add up the sum of the individual parts. How do we actually qualify that? Well, it qualifies if one person is actually providing like some sort of question or some sort of viewpoint that changes things and like incorporates it into the final product so that it's just different, it's fuller, it's a little bit deeper, it's more rigorous, it's more pressure tested. When it comes to participation, like everyone is either questioning or they're contributing, so we can actually see like everyone is actually a big part of this. And can I say something about participation? Can we do more than assign the role of like a scribe and a timekeeper? Like I get it, like someone has to keep time, maybe someone needs to like write it down, but like everyone should have a meaningful role, because I don't really know how often we like tell adults like your role here is to watch the time, and I'm just like sitting like this the whole time. It doesn't really make sense. The part that I'm very kind of like interested about is time management. Time management means like, did the group complete the task? I think that sometimes we want to micromanage our kids in ways that don't actually make sense. I work with schools, the school systems in 35 states right now. And what I find interesting about this is that when I start doing this, if you don't have the handout right now, everyone who registered for this gets an email. So I will make sure that in that email, I'm going to have all your emails. So by the end of the week, whenever I get that list, I'll just make sure everyone that came to this session gets all the handouts and the rubrics and everything I'm talking about here, okay? But like in all these meetings that I have with people, and these are busy people, superintendents, chief academic officers, gifted coordinators, and they're like, do I just call them? I'm like, all right, let me tell you my quotes and my pricing, whatever. I'm like, no, like, what's going on? Like, how's your family? How are your kids? Like, what's going on? How are you? So like, we talk about time management. Are we being a little crazy if we think that kids are going to get in the group for 7 minutes and be like, okay, so who's doing it? No, they're kids. They're kids who are longing for a connection. So if they want to take like a minute to warm up and just kind of talk and get the initial stuff out, like, let them do it. They know the time. They know what they've got to do. They know they got a timeline. Like, we've got to do a little bit of letting go when it comes to this, okay? So that's a whole nother sidebar, but time management means they're getting it done. Today, we're focusing on better together. And a better together in distance learning, there are some specific ways to get there. And what we're going to do is look at mistake analysis as the first way. How many of you all would say that you have kids right now, gifted children who are struggling with perfectionism, almost to a point of paralysis, where like, if they don't have an exact answer, they ain't even going to try. Like, if it's not right there, they are not even going to try. They're not even going to attempt. The fear of failure is so heavy on our kids. But being a lawyer, your whole life is mistakes. And I find that if we start to change our attitude when it comes to mistakes, things change altogether. First of all, let me back up for a second. That activity I just did with that StubHub case, and this whole thing I'm about to go into, I think this is an important thing to do before we go into these next slides. When I first started doing this work 5 years ago, people were telling me very surprising things. They were surprised. They're like, Colin, this is so weird. I'm like, what's weird? Well, when we do these cases or when I do my lessons using these frameworks, you know what's starting to happen? We're starting to see that like my like high achieving, straight A high flyers are on the struggle bus. They're having a really hard time. And then what's crazy is my struggling learners, like the kids who, despite their best effort, typically have a tough time academically. They work hard, but they still have a tough time academically. They do surprisingly well. And then the shocker of all shockers is that my behavior kids have become the rock stars. Let's take that one by one. Like, what's going on with my like straight A high flying kids as to why they struggle in this sort of instructional format? And again, put your number in the chat right in here for like all panelists and attendees so we can all see what your answers is. Why are our traditional high achievers struggling when instructional looks like this? What's going on? Why do they struggle so much? What have y'all noticed in your experience? They're straight A kids when they're taking like regular classes. They're straight A kids in their traditional stuff when they go, okay, so like when you take away that level of structure, when you take away that concrete right answer, when there's no clear algorithm, when there's nothing to memorize and parrot back to you, this idea of like, well, I don't even know how to engage because it's not quite clear. I'm not getting that same sort of a feedback loop that I get where I'm like, am I right? Is this here? So like, tell me what to do. Like, tell me very explicitly what to do so we get to this point where we recognize that that's a funk. Well, explain something to me. What about those struggling learners who a lot of educators often presume are too slow or too low, right? It's either too slow or too low to engage in critical thinking. Why do they do surprisingly well with this sort of construct? What's happening? What's happening with my struggling learners? And specifically, I'm talking about those kids who work hard, but typically still have a tough time getting good grades in a traditional construct. So for one, Danny, come on now. That's exactly it. It's that messiness. It's the coping. If I taught you something and you're like, I don't know what Seale's talking about, you're going to find 14 different ways to figure it out until you figure it out. Like, you have an interesting advantage in life. And the 21st century competency is learning how to learn. You actually have a massive leg up. My super high achievers, you tell them something, they get it like this. They don't even know how they've got it. But when you are actually able to get into all that funk, it's like you are able to see that grade a lot more clearly than somebody who just kind of goes incident to incident to incident, okay? I can go from concepts instead of just skills. I can see the big picture because I often have to see the big picture. I can be more flexible because my mind forces me to be flexible. My divergent way of viewing the world actually helps. And what about my favorite, my behavior kids? Why have my behavior kids become the rock stars when it comes to that StubHub case? When it comes to looking at these other sorts of constructs around critical thinking? Why do they become that? Well, for one, they're engaged in it because it's drama, it's conflict, it's shenanigans and tomfoolery. So when I look at shenanigans and tomfoolery, I'm like, sign me up. Listen to me. Listen to me. They can dance when they're teaching. I love it. Like, you can probably imagine, based off of how I interact with you all, what I was like as a third grader. The hint is it was no different than how I was as a seventh grader. The other hint is it's no different than how it was when I was an attorney. This is who I am. And the reality about who I am is this. I was always gifted but. Y'all know what I'm talking about? I was gifted but. Colin's gifted but he's lazy. He's too talkative. He doesn't finish his assignments. He's sloppy. Colin's gifted but fill in the blank. And what's so interesting about this, particularly being a kid who's like identified gifted at 7 and diagnosed with ADHD at 37. My birthday was on Monday. Like, I just turned 38, right? So this is new stuff. Like, gifted but was such an interesting barrier to me in K-12 education. But when I got to law school, I don't know what happened. The same kid who was never even student of the month, the week, or the day, all of a sudden graduated top of my class. All of a sudden, a lifetime of telling my kids, or telling my teachers stuff like, well, what had happened was, all of a sudden became a benefit. The idea that I can see the world from different angles and I can kind of live in that funk and see the other side and think on my toes became an asset. So what I want to really talk around here is the idea that this construct in and of itself is equity. In and of itself, because we're giving more kids a chance to shine. We're giving more kids a chance to show their brilliance in ways that the traditional structure doesn't always value. So when I start looking at what this means, I'll give you a very concrete example. if instead of solving equations, if instead of saying, why is Mr. Seale's problem wrong, I say, hey, Mr. Seale did it wrong and Karen did it wrong. Which one is more right? Now we're all up in the funk. If I'm the lawyer for the left-hand side, I'm like, well, we should get more credit because I just made a small subtraction error. X equals 5 is pretty close to the final answer of X equals 6. And actually, you know what? It is actually completely right because I just estimated the 8 to be a 10. So that's actually right. Okay? Meanwhile, if I'm on the right-hand side, I would be like, you know what? Like, I subtracted right in the first step, unlike those jokers over there. And like X equals 10, I just made an error. But at least I was like, computationally accurate. So I can ask this question of like, what's more important, being computationally accurate or being conceptually accurate? So when I start digging even deeper, I can think about this other kid who looked at X equals 10 on his right-hand side, and he can say, you know what? This one is perfectly right, Mr. Seale. How is that right? Look, it's perfect. Those first two lines. I subtracted 8 from both sides. 2x equals 12, right? Yeah. And then x equals 10. Bam. And I'm like, this guy. And because I'm a behavior kid, I knew where he was going with this. Any behavior kids understand what's going on here and how we can say that that's exactly right? Granted, there's no math involved here, really. He didn't do any calculation to get that on x equals 10. He's thinking about this like a rebel. He's thinking about this like someone who just thinks differently. He's thinking about this like a what had happened was kind of kid. Does anyone see how this right-hand side is technically correct? Subtract it from both sides, and that step is good, and then x equals 10. How is x equal 10 a right answer? It has nothing to do with addition or subtraction or anything like that. Anybody see it? Nah, no taking a 2 away. None of that. None of that. No, no, no. None of that. None of that stuff. It has nothing to do with addition. You got to think about this like a behavior kid. You got to think about this as someone that's looking at this from a very different sort of idea. Maybe a different language altogether. X equals 10. It's a Roman numeral. If it's a Roman numeral, x is equal to 10. So Mr. Seale, see, I subtracted 8 from both sides, 2x equals 12. And FYI, just so you know that I know, x is 10 in Roman numerals. Technically correct, right? So like, look, I don't really know about like which one should get more credit, but I know that I want that kid on my pandemic reopening team because that kid thinks about stuff differently. Okay. And that actually has a value in the real world. When I start thinking about what this means, we can even think around like test prep, right? Because in test prep, we can anticipate how kids get things wrong and use that to kind of move it to a different level. What does this mean for distance learning? It means that if you got worksheets that look like this, we're like, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take whatever we're doing in class and just put it on the internet and call that virtual learning, whatever. But we can still do this using your actual curriculum. So if you've got curriculum that looks like this, it doesn't take a whole lot of extra work to say, you know what? I'm going to create 2 sample wrong answers that might actually be wrong answers that students made often or wrong answers that they can likely make. So if you see in this one, right, they're supposed to add these numbers up, but like 97 Highway North isn't a number that should be added to find the distance. It's just the name of the highway. So if this was a discussion board topic and people had to kind of break up in different groups and make their best arguments of how to do this, work together and submit a flip grid, come in with their arguments kind of for and against. I mean, you had to kind of like create that sort of construct. Now my kids are talking, my kids are engaging, my kids are getting into that funk. I could even have a shared document. I could have 7 different groups and they're going back and forth here, but they're doing the same sort of construct. But now they're saying, what are the most likely errors that Joe Schmo will make? Which means when I talk about Joe Schmo, we know how Joe Schmo rolls. If I look at this shirt and it's $20 and it's on sale for 10% off, what's the final price? What would that Joe Schmo kid, that kid who reads it too fast, doesn't really like work carefully, doesn't do all the steps and picks the wrong answer every time because it's a trick, what would he pick for the shirt that costs $20 and is on sale for 10% off? 20, 10, subtract them, they're 10. 10% of 20 is 2. I'm just gonna put 2. I'm not gonna subtract it from the 18. From the 20 to get 18. So if I can create those things where people are coming together to talk about the mistakes, there's a lot of talk we can do when we think about how you might mess it up. And now I got kids that want to come in early, because if I come in early, I might be able to pick like an easier mistake, but it gets harder as you go on because you got to find more creative ways that they might mess it up. We can look at mistake analysis really in any sort of subject, in any sort of content area. Which wrong is more right? Why did this person get it wrong? Or even which mistake matters the most? What's the most significant mistake? So if I'm looking at students' work around how I spent my summer vacation, where would I start with this? Newsflash, some of y'all are also looking at this and thinking around a reality that we've got to name. A lot of teachers don't get formal education in critical thinking either. This is usually something that they get as on-the-job training. So imagine your teachers on-the-job training, PD, involve them looking at student mistakes and assessing the importance of it. If I'm a third grade teacher looking at this paragraph on the first week of school, where am I going to start with this kid? Some people say, well, sentence structure and like main idea and a clear beginning and clear end. I'm like, oh, okay. I might look at capitalization rules. Some might look at punctuation. What matters the most and why? There's not really a right answer, but even in the TD professional development space, I can get my gen ed teachers in particular starting to think about this in a way they wouldn't normally think about. So when I start looking at mistake analysis, which I go into a lot of depth in the book, it's probably that different perspectives analysis is probably the biggest kind of practical section we go into. I also want to talk about the idea of investigating and discovery, because we give our kids too much information sometimes on the front end, and I'm not sure we always need to do it. Okay, like I can tell you right now that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, but I don't know what that actually means because I never really was like taught about the cell in any other way but like memorize these terms. So if I look at this example of this lawsuit, this hot coffee case in McDonald's where this lady got burned by her coffee and ended up suing them, okay? I don't care about like the actual who you think you should win. Some of you might actually know this case, and I don't care if you know the case either. Here's what I care about. I care about what happened in the early 90s when this occurred. What do you think happened in the next like 5 minutes after this went down? Like after she burned the coffee, she spilled the coffee on herself, like what happened? Any thoughts in the next 30 minutes? What happened? This woman is, and it's complete stop. She does this whole thing. So before the ambulance even comes, right? So I want to go right to the scene. Like, so she's screaming, she's cursing, she's saying out. She's sitting there in a pool of coffee in her lap? Probably not. She's probably getting out of the car. She's like hooting and hollering, and she's in the parking lot. If this was 2020, people would be like, "Ooh, she is suffering," but I got some good angles here. But maybe back in the day, they would actually like help her, try to get a first aid kit, talk to the manager, whatever have you. Now, look, the whole point of this is I'm trying to visualize what went down. I'm trying to visualize what's going on, right? And when I'm visualizing this, I'm starting to think, all right, I've got my eyewitnesses intact. But what if I wanted to find more creative witnesses? What would be, like, forget about the manager, forget about the people that served her the coffee, forget about the people who saw her in a parking lot, even forget about, like, the people who treated her in surgery. Who would I want to talk to if I was McDonald's trying to defend themselves in this case? If I was Stella trying to make some real money, like forget about the grandson, forget about Stella. Let's get creative with it. We figure this is a low floor, high ceiling construct. All my kids are going to get Stella. All my kids are going to get the grandson. All my kids are going to get the manager maybe and the person who served the coffee, people in the parking lot. Who's more creative? If I want to try to, so the employee who heats the coffee, and is that who I want to talk to? I want to talk to, like, Katie, other customers who order coffee? What other customers? Danny wants the same thing. Like, what regulars do I want to talk to in particular? What regulars? Others who spill, what others that spill on themselves? Is it going to be a certain characteristic of those people? Like, what people? Oh, the people that don't get hurt? What about the old people? What about, like, all the senior citizens that come in there? What if McDonald's is trying to burn them out because they got tired of giving out the senior discount? I don't know, but I need to get some money. I need to get a story. I need to make a case. So there's the ER doctors and all of that, but I might want to talk to her primary care doctor. I want to know how she was before this. Was she running triathlons? Or did she have, like, Parkinson's or something like that, where you're like, yo, like, why are you doing this yourself? Why is your grandson such a hot mess? Like, he's trash. And we start looking at these ideas. We start seeing, like, all right, I can start talking to whoever made the coffee itself, like the actual manufacturer of the coffee machine, the manufacturer of the coffee lid. And I start digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And, like, now when I start to go through, like, what actually went down, there's, like, a yearning. There's a moment where you're like, so, like, what happens? What happens next? But the same thing happens if you're going through the gingerbread man and the gingerbread man gets to the river after running away from everybody. Like, oh no, what is he going to do? The gingerbread man can't swim. Can you make a prediction or inference? What are you going to do next? And then could we then later check that prediction or inference against that? So now you're not only invested because you want to check out your own idea, you brought your values, your assets, your mind, your thinking to the table, you want to validate it, but you also are like, you got that Law and Order impact. You know, you've been changing channels and you find the first 2 minutes of a Law and Order episode and you're just done. After the next 58 minutes, you're done because you have to watch the whole thing. So now you're asking all these questions, you're going into it, and you start realizing this coffee was always supposed to be hot, but this coffee was 20 degrees hotter than other restaurants, 30 degrees hotter than coffee you make at home. It was so hot, you get third-degree burns within seconds of it touching your skin. Third-degree burns, you can typically see bone. And in this case, 700 other people in the last decade had experienced third-degree burns from this coffee. And in this case, her burns were not these minor burns. She got burned in her most private areas. She had to get skin grafts to kind of take skin from one part and put over there. She was already a small lady, but you're talking about a permanently life-changing situation. So do I have more questions now? Of course I do. Of course I have more questions. Of course I can dig a lot deeper into this. Of course I can start unveiling more funk. And the more I get into the funk, right? Like you start talking about like number sense, right? Like, well, like 700, well, what's my denominator looking like? How, like 700 over the 10 years, was it steady? Or did McDonald's change a policy 2 years ago that led to a massive spike? How does that compare to Starbucks and Burger King and Wendy's and their coffee burn issues? We start realizing that McDonald's has this kind of perverse profit motive where you could raise the temperature to an unsafely high temperature and get the same strength of coffee out of a fewer amount of beans. And we start recognizing like that doing right is more important than being right becomes extra funky when we say Stella just wanted her medical bills covered. And McDonald's said, here's $800, have a good life, right? So when we start looking at this construct, really, where can't we do this? Do you need to tell me what an igneous rock is, or what a metamorphic rock is, and what a sedimentary rock is? Or can you just give me a whole bunch of rocks and allow me to classify them, make some sort of judgment of what those rules should be, and kind of figure that out on my own? When I start looking through and looking at any book that has an open ending, how would I figure out what happens next? Like, who would I talk to? Even this idea of like, who would I talk to? How would they be biased? What would they know? Would help me understand how to piece this sort of thing together. I can do this in so many ways, from health class to even thinking about the real world issues of like, how do I do sports safely at my school? How do I set up these things to kind of center me as a problem finder? And if I'm the problem finder, my investment in that problem is so much deeper when it comes down to solving the problem. So when I look at this, again, we don't have to be really complicated. Again, we're talking about shared docs. We're talking about spaces for conversation. We're talking about the idea that kids are having something to talk about, period. Because we're in a really funky spot when it comes to kids not engaging or not even being a part of that classroom space. They never came there for us. They're there for each other. And this kind of brings them to the center of what's going on. So when we start looking at the investigations, it brings us to our very, very last topic we'll talk about, settlement and negotiation. And this one I'll go through a little bit deeper because, or quicker. When we talk around settlement negotiation, a lot of us think that lawyers are lawyers because they like to argue. And we tell kids that all the time. But in reality, lawyers negotiate. So many of our cases, like 98% civil and in criminal, are being negotiated. You're making a deal. Well, how do you make a deal? Well, you got to be able to ask why. You got to look at the issue on a surface and ask why of what's going on. So like, what would it look like if our kids were able to understand like how to kind of negotiate, how to wheel and deal? Wheeling and dealing could be like a life or death skill. For instance, and again, another low floor, high ceiling construct. How do you feel about turkey? Like most people might have like opinions around turkey. People don't like turkey. People think turkey is too dry. People think that their like family members suck at making turkey. Some people love turkey and they can't wait to have turkey. Some people can't wait to have that real good turkey coma that they get at the Thanksgiving. And it's like, when you start thinking around the process of turkey, we start looking at like the people who cook the turkey, people who get it served in their plate and are super happy, the people who get it on their plate and are super disappointed. But like, what about the turkey? Has anybody asked how's the turkey feel about this? Because this is actually a pretty important legal issue that comes up every single year. It's a really important legal issue that comes up every single year. So when you look at this issue of turkey pardoning, if we've got our kids wheeling and dealing around whether they should like stump for carrots, and carrots should be the one that we try to let off the hook this year. And this is a real thing that happens. These are like real characteristics that they put to be like who we should pardon. And we got to convince the president of which turkey should get spared this year. We are getting our kids into that level of funk. Even when we look at one of our earlier lessons from the first edition around like Subway having these $5 footlongs that weren't exactly 11 feet long, a foot long. They weren't exactly 12 inches. So what does that mean if you're Subway talking about $5 footlong? Well, what if you were representing Subway and you had to figure out how you would settle this case? Now we're getting into this funk where our kids are now looking at, well, what's the real interest at hand? What do they really need? Like, why were they really wrong? Going all the way back to that StubHub case. And what's so powerful about this idea of helping my kids think around, what's the worst case scenario? Can I actually do better than that worst case scenario through a deal? Now they're getting to a space where we're not choosing between SEL, which we know they need in distance learning, and rigorous academics. We're realizing that was always a false choice all along. And we're in this part now that I've got to point out, like, we go from there's too much talking in class to like, can somebody please talk? Can somebody make me feel like I am actually like having a class right now? Can somebody say something? So the whole construct of this is to give my kids more of a reason to talk, because talking is just thinking out loud. How do we pull in current events that they would want to talk about? How do we look at something of Mice and Men? Instead of like Lenny having George having to kill Lenny at the end, what if they could settle that? Every single war could have been resolved by a peace treaty. What could that have looked like? When we start looking at the way that this gets planned out, we've now got 3 different ideas where y'all all use different platforms, but I'm sure the ideas are already popping up between using Nearpod for this and using Flipgrid for this and using, like, there's so many different things that you can do. Which one of these activities are you most excited about sharing when you get back? I'm just curious to see in the chat. Mistake analysis, investigation discovery, settlement negotiation. What are you excited about trying out in whatever your hybrid or distance learning space is, or if you're still doing straight up in person, that's fine too. So I'm glad that so many doing mistake analysis. I'm glad I spent that much time on that, because that usually comes up a lot. Settlement negotiation is so powerful, especially for a lot of our kids who struggle with that idea of doing right being more important than being right. Super, super, super cool to watch all of that. A couple of things as I'm wrapping up, and I'll take any questions you want to have at this time. We do have our website. If you go to thinkLaw.us /NAGC, you'll be able to get more information about all the work that we do, including our curriculum. I recognize some names here, people that are actually using our curriculum right now that can allow you to dig deeper, whether it's distance learning or in person. And what's great about our curriculum is it works in every kind of classroom. It works really well for GT pullout, but like for schools that are trying to figure out how to do better talent identification work from pre-K to first grade, the early elementary edition works wonders for that. If you're looking for middle school electives, or you're looking for more things around like building a positive school culture where kids have a much more firm sense of their scholar identity, these really are practical how for doing that. We do workshops just like this all over the country. You can book us for that, full day, half a day, whatever kind of suits your pleasure. We have a really awesome hybrid virtual learning model that's very interactive and engaging. There's also the book and the book study that goes with the book. Some of you already have it, but you can buy it in bulk as well to be able to dig deeper. And then there's swag. Because I told you, man, like these are things that people need to know. We live at a time right now where people should know that they shouldn't just have to raise their voice. They should probably try improving their argument. We do other free sessions as well. So like next Thursday, we have this educational series happening with Nancy Gutierrez, who's a fabulous education leader, talking around more inclusive leadership as a way that we can look at decision-making structures. And it's really for anyone, whether you're a school leader, a gifted coordinator, classroom teacher, gifted teacher. Those series and conversations are always very powerful, and they are free for you to go through. The curriculum is K through 12. It's for all grade levels. We even have two pre-K partners using it as well. For those that want to do a deeper dive into our equity, more systemic work, we do workshops across school systems. We do parent workshops. We really try to make it so that in a curriculum agnostic way, I don't care what you use for ELA or math, I want every school teacher in every subject area to be able to concretely apply these strategies. Because for me, this is what equity looks like at the classroom level, when all kids are getting the tools to lead, innovate, and break the things that need to be broken. So as we go through this, again, we are going to be sending you all the handouts via email. When you're looking at starting this, it really does depend. Some people start by getting the book and getting bulk copies of the book in a book study. Some people start by having me do a professional development session and get the buy-in that way. This is strangely a time of year between November and March where so many of our partnerships actually start. It used to be a lot in the summer and the beginning of the school year, but more and more we get people that are starting in the midst of the school year. So if you go to the website, you can scan if you want extra information about this. We will be sending everybody handouts for this and other things that we set for the workshop as well. But thank you all so much for engaging and being a part of the conversation. Any additional questions that you all have? So thank you again. And if you haven't already, please do follow us on social media at Colin E. Seale or at thinkLaw US. Really, really, really excited. We do, like I said, like this is like so important to me. All the PD that we do, I'm actually the one that's doing it. The curriculum is so much fun. We had an awesome like Halloween. We do like current events and holiday themes as well. There's a really awesome Halloween lesson where like a neighbor put tombstones outside of his house as decorations, but he had the names of his neighbors on there. So kids are getting into all this funk around these things. And that funk, our kids need it more than ever. And really, at this time, like, it's the holidays, man. We got to give them something. We got to give them something that's going to like get them excited around stuff. So yes, please share that quote about blooms being their Maslow's. I know I was that kid, and I know we've got so many kids out there. Is that a threat? No, it's a promise. Okay, stop telling me to pull my weeds, HOA. I'm not saying that personally. I just live in an HOA, and they got a lot of problems. But I appreciate you all. Appreciate you all so much. Please, please, please do stay in touch. And if you have any questions for me personally, you can email me at colin@thinklaw.us. And I'm very, very excited to see many of you all tomorrow morning. On Saturday, when I do my corner talk. For those of you that are much more focused on like, what do I do with adopting this thinkLaw program? I am going to have a corner talk that starts on Saturday morning, and it'll be available for recorded to watch as well. We also have an exhibitor booth. So if you want to come to our booth, the thinkLaw booth, Jonathan is there, and he'll be able to kind of help you through any questions you all have there as well. Thank you all so much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.